delved into why things like that happen with any given player, that I think like the advanced part of putting coaching is being able to delve into those for any player and work out the nuances and then work out what they need to do to manage those patterns, manage those feelings, and refine the routines and approaches in general. Because you're talking, there's, if you can, small margins in each of those areas in terms of understanding, actually, your net effect, it can be massive, can't it?
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
there's loads of little aspects like that which they're not technical.
Yeah.
Right. It's understanding some of these other elements.
And I think that is just such a massive part of this, And if we then take that, let's say, one step further, how does that then become even more difficult when you've got players travelling all around the world on all different types of grasses?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That must be, when you go onto different grasses, then are you purely assess? Do you just assess the grass and its effect on the ball, or do you ever change mechanics and things to align themselves probably better with the surface they're on?
I think from a grass point of view, if you look at different grass, it's like Poa or Bermuda. I think obviously you get on some greens where you've got grain, so that's affecting like speed and potentially break, because you can get grain that's across against the slope. So the aspects of green reading there, but like say when you go to Poa greens, they're so bumpy, and the indentations that you can have, ball can be sat in an indentation. Like launch becomes important, so it could be that you need to adjust loft to help like the launch. Anything too low on Poa in launch, and the ball is going to be bobbling, and once it's bobbling, it's a pot luck if it stays on line. So there are some small elements like that. But I wouldn't say they're the biggest sort of performance differentials.
Okay. Now, I've got a few questions, and I'm conscious, you appreciate getting off. I'll just go through a few of these.
Yeah.
How often do you see a player's stroke mirror their full swing mechanics?
If I had a pound every time I said something to a player and they said I'd do that in my full swing, I'd be sat on the beach in the Bahamas drinking
that really is amazing, isn't it? When
smoking a fat cigar.
The size of the stroke against a full swing.
I think you get general movement patterns, don't you? Like whether it be like a tilt then turn, or lead wrist goes into flexion, or like even triggers how they start the stroke. If you look at like Henrik Stenson's sort of right knee, pressure shift trigger, that's in his putting stroke.
Amazing. Someone's put the green reading stuff in Switzerland. December was awesome.
That must be Stuart. I paid him for that. Cheers, Stu.
Which one should you trust, conscious or subconscious?
Well, that can vary from player to player. It can vary from putt to putt. That's what I'm talking about with any given player. You've got to work through that process. Where is it, where is it that they have to trust it? Where is it that instinct may be overriding? There's a whole load of things to consider. So it's neither one or the other. It depends, which is my favourite reply.
That's who it is. Line on the ball in general, do you think that helps players, or is it?
It depends.
Is it depend on the length of putt or the break, or just situation?
It depends, yeah. So all of these questions you're going to ask now, I'm just going to say it depends. What barriers stop players making the improvement? It depends, Russell.
Hey,
but next question. Barriers. It depends. No, I'm having a bit of a laugh, but it does depend. There's so many variables, and he's trying to work with the player cop out. Go and flag someone off on social media, Russell. And it does depend on the player. There's so many, you've got to, like years ago, like I'd always look and think, I'd love to work with I could improve him. And people ask you that question, but until you get under the bonnet with any player, it's hard to really work out what they need. So, like, does a line help someone? I've given players lines to use, and I've also taken lines away. You know, I've been at tournaments where I've encouraged a player to not use a line that week. And I've encouraged players to use a line on a certain putt. So I think it's about delving into the puzzle that the player has and helping them rearrange it to make it look like the picture. And that's going to depend on what you face with each player. So
I you know, and it's I use the line a little bit, Phil, when it comes to some of the juniors.
Yeah.
Just to give them the concept of actually aiming the putter. You know what I mean? Where we're probably not quite so bothered about a lot of the putts they're facing initially are quite straight, you know, and just get the idea of the putter sitting on the floor and where it should point, so that they let's say they get a perception early on of how the putter looks when it points straight. But, you know, I think there's times where, you know, certainly from my point of view, where you could have a putt that's got quite a lot of break in it, and the line sometimes can take away a little bit of the feel aspect of being able to.
I think there's pros and cons. There's pros and cons to the use of it, and that's why it can be situational dependent. I know I spoke to Andrew Rice last week, and we had a bit of a giggle because there was a bit of a debate on Twitter where Andrew was involved in about the use of the line. And it's a bit like arguing which is the most important part of putting. Is it green reading? Is it speed? Is it line? You know, so it depends. Depends on the individual, depends where their weakness lies. But the line, I mean, I use the line a lot when I'm not playing much at the moment, but when I do play, I would use the line. I would use it specifically on certain putts. But as I got to bigger breaking putts where your range of start line can vary a little bit based on speed, and I'm more likely to under read and over feel, I'll go without the line. So it really does depend on the player, and I can't get any more specific than that, really.
No, I think, you know, I Phil, you said thank you for giving me half an hour of your time. I know
no problem.
I really appreciate it. You know,
we've got a few more minutes. So, you trying to
come
up early. We'll have a couple more questions.
If
I can get.
Well, I was you might get one with an answer. What metrics should amateurs assess? What metrics should amateurs use to assess their ability? Should there be any comparison to pro stats?
Okay, I mean, the only stat that I think putting wise is worth looking at is strokes gained, because it's a measure of your ability related to distance. Whatever distance you are, what's your ability at that distance? Because obviously, a putt from 3 foot's a lot easier than a putt from 20 foot. So counting putts per round is a complete waste of time. Greens in reg is iffy, putts per green in reg. Adding up footage is terrible. You could hold a 100-foot putt on the first and then 3 putt every hole thereafter, and you've got 100-foot total footage, which would be, brilliant. It would be a great score, but you've had, 53 putts. So the best stat is strokes gained. I've heard the argument that the downside of that is the baseline is comparing against PGA pros. Well, that's fine, because all you do over time is you create your own baseline. So if you're an amateur golfer, you play off 10, you start using putts gained, you go out there, the first few days, you're -5, -5, -5. You feel like you're not putting great. Then you go out there, you put really well, and you're -1. So somewhere in there is probably your middle ground. And ultimately, that can be your zero, your baseline over time. But at least you have a comparative measurement, from round to round. Well, I saved 4 shots today on my putting, whereas you go out one day, have 23 putts, and the next day 36. The logic some people apply is I'm 13 shots better on the greens. Well, that would be bullshit, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So strokes gained is the only stat I think you should be using. Obviously, as an amateur golfer, you just use it to create your own baseline. You're not going to be as good as the pros, so you are going to be negative strokes gained. But your target could be, and the great thing about putting as an amateur golfer, you can go out and put as well as a pro. And you see that all the time, don't you? Where
Yeah.
club golfers can put really well. So that can be your target. To try and be 0 or better. But that would be the one stat I'd encourage people to use.
What player? I think that should say, what player would you not like to work with? Someone who don't listen, probably. That's a toughie. You don't want to answer that.
Yeah. Someone who's already a good putter, but bottom of the world rankings. I've got nowhere to go with them, have I?
That might also come back to haunt you. Has aim point made players focus more on the feel of green reading than technique of putting?
Aim point, I think, has been brilliant for the awareness. For in the bigger picture, it's brought more focus and attention to green reading. It's helped people appreciate, the components of green reading. What factors determine break. I was lucky with Harold years ago. Some of his techniques and understanding and knowledge were fantastic. It wasn't in the same structure or process as green reading, but it gave me a good foundation and understanding. And then spending time with Mark Sweeney and learning more about aim point, has helped me as well, like take that knowledge a step further. And it's also given me a particular technique that I can use with certain players. And I think, under each of these skill sets, whether it be start, line, green reading, or speed, there are different techniques that you can apply. Whether it be different techniques stroke-wise, whether it be different techniques in terms of green reading, and aim point would be one of those. And I think it's a great technique for a lot of players to use. But I would say the overall introduction and how people have embraced aim point have helped people appreciate green reading and certainly helped a lot of people understand it better.
One more, Phil.
Yeah.
Does eye dominance play a part? And do the eyes need to be parallel to the line of the intended put, or is it more important that you see straight?
I think eye dominance can have an influence. Yeah, I see eye dominance affecting head orientations, head, whether it be through sort of setup or movement. I see it affecting ball position, stuff like that, and your eyes don't need to be parallel. I think it's and you even don't need to see straight. I think that's a little bit of a myth. I think understanding someone's perceptual bias can help you understand how you help them. But if it was a kind of a choice over achieving a particular head position and not seeing straight, or having an unorthodox head position and seeing straight, 9 times out of 10 you take the unorthodox position that saw straight. But you even don't need to see straight. Some players have really poor vernier acuity, which is like your ability to see horizontal, vertical lines. So like my missus, if she puts a picture up on the wall, it's skewed like that. I walk in the room, I say, well, that doesn't look straight. She'll argue with me. I'll get me level out and I'll prove her wrong. Yeah. But her vernier acuity skewed. So you apply that, or she's not got great vernier acuity, you apply that to like a putting position. And some people can just struggle to see a straight line. But that doesn't mean that they can't aim the putter correctly or use other senses and awareness to be able to know where that target is in space. So,
and is that something that you could test?
Yeah.
Is that just something people can test, or the eye test? How does that work? Because that seems quite,
So if you went for an in-depth screening with a sports optician, one of the things that you would be tested on is vernier acuity. That would be one. You'd be tested on like depth perception, vernier acuity, all these other things beyond, you know, whether you need a set of glasses type stuff. And you can, one of the things that you could do within a putting stroke, so we have a device called a T-line. So the you know, the subtle hint here, little promo, but the Vizio training aids that we produce, there's a thing, and Canon Performancer found the T-bar, there you go. So we have a device called a T-line, which if you line up relative to the target, you've got this, you've got two references, the inline reference and then the perpendicular reference. So if you stand over that, then you'll get a sense of where that line looks. You know, does it look left or right? Does it look at the hole? The perpendicular reference, does that look open? Does it look closed? And that can help you assess the player's like vernier acuity in that instance. So it helps you assess their perceptual bias. And sometimes that information, that perceptual bias, doesn't always match up what they do. So in that case, very often it's the player's not actually using that information. You know, they're using other senses to be able to orientate themselves. So the best example I could say that is some people aim their stroke. You know, if you've got a pull bias, then your orientation, you sense whether to, you know, you can sense to aim right to hit it on line, but yet your perceptual bias could be very different. So
you could actually, if you got, like, say, a sports optician in, you could actually profile the eyes of your student. Yeah. Have you done that?
Yes. Yeah.
I knew you could.
Yeah.
So
we used a couple of different people, and a few years ago at Glen Eagles, we did a study with a guy, a practitioner, where we collected a bunch of data with a portion of the field who volunteered, and used an eye tracking device to then look at some of the physiological aspects and then match that to the actual performance of the eyes as well. So we've done a bit of research in that.
Wow. That's obviously then the future's players are just going to get better and better and better, and the coach is going to learn more and more about it.
Well, bullshit battles brains. So with a bit of that, you can convince people that, you know.
No, brilliant, Phil, brilliant. I mean, we must be well over time now.
Yeah, no, I better go. I've got a 3-year-old I need to entertain. So,
good luck with that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, good to speak to you anyway, Mike. Take care.
I appreciate it. You
all
know,
right, cheers,
I'm
guys.
sure people on here, if they want to look at all your stuff, the video stuff, the putting stuff is just fabulous. So I you know, have a look. It's really good stuff. Thanks, Phil. See you soon.
Cheers, everyone. Bye. Stay safe.